Hey mamas, you're listening to the Balanced Working Mama podcast, the only podcast teaching you how to balance your work, motherhood, and wellness. I am Dr. Amber Thornton, clinical psychologist and mama wellness consultant. Each week we dive into tips and strategies and much more so that you too can become a balanced working mama. Let's dive in. Hey mamas, welcome to the Balanced Working Mama podcast. If you are new here, I am Dr. Amber. I am a clinical psychologist and I am also the founder of Balanced Working Mama. And our mission is to help moms to find balance in motherhood, specifically for millennial moms, like millennial moms finding balance in motherhood. And there's so many ways that we can do that. And on this season of the podcast, of course, we are talking a lot about default parenting and how default parenting really does interfere with our ability to have balance in motherhood. So I am so glad that you are here. I'm so glad that you have found your way to the podcast, whether you're listening or whether you are watching me on YouTube. Either way, I'm so glad you're here. All right, y'all, let's get started for today. So I'm really excited about today's topic. But first, if you are watching me on YouTube, you notice I have on this very comfortable, like, oversized hoodie. And whenever I wear this on Instagram, y'all, I get so many compliments about this hoodie. And I think it's because it just looks so unique. And I want to just actually tell you the story behind this. So like you already know what this hoodie is about. And if you're listening on the podcast, definitely maybe go over to YouTube so you can see exactly what I'm wearing. But this hoodie, y'all, is legit a hoodie that my husband bought for himself that he didn't like. And I was like, I kind of like the pattern though. I like the colors. And then I was like, let me put this on. And it was big and comfortable and unique. And I was like, all right, it's mine. And the best part, it came from Walmart. Like he said it was like less than $20, bought it for himself, didn't like it, and now it's mine. So I'm trying to like find ways that I can like really make this my own. Today it's like this little off the shoulder look, this oversized hoodie. I've worn this with jeans and it's looked really nice. I always put on some big earrings with it and it just pops. So that's what I'm wearing today, if anyone is curious. But let's get into today's topic. Today we are talking about what is default parenting. So as you know, in the last episode or so, we really finally introduced this topic of we're going to be talking about default parenting, and I explained to you why. And so today I actually want to help you understand what I mean when I say default parenting. And so today I'm going to be in my teaching bag. Y'all know I'm a psychologist, but I also back in the day used to be an adjunct faculty for various universities, actually. I taught at Wilberforce University for a while. I taught at Wright State University. I taught at the University of Tennessee for a little bit. One day I got to get back into teaching, but today I really actually want to teach about this idea and this concept of default parenting so that you understand exactly what we're talking about, and it'll help you identify whether this is actually something that you are experiencing. So today, I'm actually looking from a Psychology Today article that I wrote. I wrote this article in November of last year. It actually was posted on my birthday last year, November 14th. So feel free to check that out. You can check it out in the on my website. I have a link to the Psychology Today article. I'll try to remember to put a link for this in the show notes for today. But the article is called "The Default Parent Syndrome: More Than Just a TikTok Trend." And I wanted to talk about this on Psychology Today in this article because I started to see this topic of being a default parent come up on TikTok first. And there were a lot of content from moms really just talking about their experience of being a default parent. A lot of it was humorous, that's how we do. A lot of times the things that we're struggling with, we make humor out of them through content on the internet. And that's what these moms were doing. However, I saw that concept and I said, yo, we got to dig deeper because there's something here. And that's where this article, the title came from, but then also the concept behind it from a psychological perspective. So let's talk about it. So what is the default parent? You all, when I'm talking about default parenting, I want you all to know that it's actually a very systemic issue, right? And so first, let's talk about the default parent syndrome as a syndrome, not just a default parent, not just default parent symptoms, but let's talk about it as a syndrome. And so when we do that, we understand that this is not just one person's problem and rather a very bigger systemic issue that we all have to play a role in to undo, right? So, first, let's talk about the default parent. Who is the default parent? And again, I'm reading directly from this article. A default parent is typically someone who is first in line when it comes to caring for children, child related responsibilities, or home related tasks. Assuming that there are two parents present, the default parent is more likely to carry the bigger load in parenting. So, even from that definition, you can already see how being a default parent then leads you to not be able to have balance in motherhood because your capacity is limited, your resources are limited, your time is limited, your energy is limited. When you are a default parent and you are first in line, that often means, if a child needs something, if something goes down in the home, you are the first one to have to take care of it. And then if backup is needed, okay, then the second in line comes in. But as the first in line, you are on it all the time. And so no wonder there's no balance in motherhood for our mamas who are default parents. Okay, let's talk about a syndrome. So when we think about syndrome, we think often about like a illness or a disease that's invasive, right? It's invasive, it's pervasive, it really like interweaves into many facets of the phenomena, the illness or the disease we're thinking about, right? Default parenting, specifically in our culture, is a syndrome because it really does interweave and invade itself into so many aspects of our lives. So, let me read the definition of a syndrome. A syndrome can be defined as a group of symptoms that consistently occur together, a condition characterized by a set of associated symptoms, or even a characteristic combinations of opinions, emotions, and behaviors. So basically, I want us to understand that default parenting is a syndrome, a cultural syndrome, a societal syndrome, because it takes some of the pressure off of us as women and mothers to not point the blame at ourselves, right? A lot of times when we're talking about default parenting, sometimes people might assume like, oh, well, it's my fault. And that's not necessarily true. And rather, this is a systemic issue that really has so many parts involved. And that's why I want us to think about it as a syndrome. With this being a systemic issue, though, however, I do want to say this. When we think about a system, and a system is basically just a variety of parts that work together to function. So we can think of our family as a system. We can think about our culture as a system, our societies, our neighborhoods are systems. Systems are made up of many, many parts that work together to function. With a system, if we want to make change within a system, because it is a system, any part of that system can change to then cause a reaction in the greater system, right? So I'm saying this to say this. Mothers, women are not to blame for default parenting. It is not our fault. It is not because we are not doing something a certain way. It's not because we're not doing this enough. This syndrome is not our fault. It is a societal issue. However, I want to let you know that you have so much power in enacting change for this syndrome and for this system, right? And I'm saying it because oftentimes many moms that I'm working with or I'm speaking to about this, they feel disempowered and they feel, quite frankly, very exhausted about this idea of undoing default parent syndrome. And that's often what I'm talking about on Instagram nowadays. However, I want you to know that there's so much power in you making the decision to make a change because you are part of this system, because you are part of your family. When you make a change, girl, the whole system gonna change. The whole system is gonna change. And that's the power I want you to feel as we go about this series in this podcast. That's the power I want you to feel as you engage on Instagram or TikTok with me in the Undoing Default Parenting series. I want you to know that no, it is not necessarily your responsibility, or you are not to blame for being a default parent. However, you have so much power in enacting and moving change in this syndrome because you are a part of the system, a big part of the system. Likewise, if your partner decided that they wanted to change the system, let's say you have a partner who's like, you know what, I've been listening to Dr. Amber. She's talking about default parenting, and I see that you are a default parent, and I want to change that for us. If your partner started to make a change, likewise, the system would change, right? So it only takes one part of this system to really make some change happen. That's the power I want you to feel as you're listening to this. That's the power I want you to embrace. You, as a default parent, play a big role in undoing this system, in undoing this syndrome within your home. Okay? So I hope you feel empowered in knowing that you have such a big role that you can play in undoing this, but it's not your fault. So now we understand that default parenting is a societal syndrome. And so that is so enlightening because it means that everybody plays a role, even our kids. So also, if you've been following along on Instagram, you know I'm doing an Undoing Default Parenting series. And what that means is I'm doing a series of reels every week where I offer one strategy, one intervention that you can utilize to help undo default parenting, right? And so these the series or these interventions cover three areas. They're things that you can do like specifically just with yourself. And often those are like mindset things or, things that you need to do for yourself to help undo default parenting. There are things that you and your partner need to do together or you do in relation to your partner. And then there are also things that you do with your kids, because when we help to enact change with our kids, that also can help to undo some of this default parenting. So again, y'all, I got you. Look, I got you this year. We are going to undo default parenting for real. I promise. Okay, you all, before we end today's episode, I want you to understand who is more likely to experience the default parent syndrome. This is another section in this article that I wrote. Again, please go read the article. I think it's really good. But I wanted you to understand who might be more likely to experience this. I think it is pretty evident that mostly in our heteronormative two-parent homes in the United States, we mostly see women being identified as default parents, right? However, the other week, I had someone in my DMs, another mother, say, you know what, this is so fascinating because I see that my husband is actually the default parent in our home. And she and I talked about this, and it was really fascinating. I think she has a very unique experience playing out in her home for why this dynamic is happening. But for me, it was a eye-opening conversation to see, like, yes, mostly women. However, not only women are default parents. Sometimes we have men or husbands or fathers who are in this role. So I want to talk through some characteristics that we can think about and consider that might make it more likely for us to become a default parent. Okay. They are this: identifying as a woman or a mother in a family system could make it more likely that you will experience the default parent syndrome. One or one's partner having a more traditional gendered norm regarding parenting. So if you or your partner tend to have more traditional views around parenting or marriage, that might increase the likelihood that you could become a default parent. One or one's partner growing up and observing more traditional gendered norms, or growing up and seeing the woman or the mom in the family being solely responsible for parenting and household tasks, that could increase the likelihood that that person could become a default parent, especially if you are a woman. This one is important because this also applies for people who grew up with single moms, right? So if you grew up with a single mom, you probably saw your mom do literally everything. And so you as a woman, if you saw that, you then might internalize that as my role as a mother. My role as a mother is to do these things, right? However, if you have a male partner and they grew up seeing their single moms do everything, they likely have internalized this belief that this is the role of a mother. This is the role of a mother. And so if I then become a husband and have a wife, this is her role. right? And so this is why it's so important to really ground ourselves in the fact that we are unlearning as a society, as a generation of parents. We are unlearning some things that have really just been very deeply ingrained in us, probably starting when we were very young. And that is also why it's so important for us to have grace for ourselves, as well as our partners who are trying to unlearn some of this too. Because many of us will come up on some resistance within ourselves, but also maybe from our partners. And we'll talk through a lot of that this season in the podcast. I also will talk through a lot of that on Instagram about how to handle that resistance, but it should be met with compassion and grace because we all are unlearning some really deep shit, y'all. We are. Me too, me included. I shared recently on Instagram that I grew up seeing a very traditional gendered norm household. My mother was a default parent to the max, and we grew up in a two-parent home. And so I am unlearning this as well. And so unlearning really does need grace and compassion. Okay. Next. If you struggle with guilt and anxiety when your attention shifts away from parenting or away from household tasks, that could increase the likelihood that you might become a default parent. And I want to say that women and mothers experience guilt and anxiety around these things far more than men and fathers do. So this again kind of falls in line with it might be more likely that a woman or a mother might experience this. If you have trouble communicating your desires and your expectations from others, that could lead you to become a default parent. Challenges with people pleasing, particularly within relationships or within your family, absolutely can lead you to default parenting because, again, if you are a woman or a mother, often others' expectations is that you should be a default parent. And they may not say those words, but the societal expectation for mothers and women is that we are supposed to do the majority of the things. And so if you are around people who have that expectation of you, but you struggle to really articulate and communicate your own feelings, your own beliefs, your own views, it could then lead you to live up to the expectations of others, right? If you struggle with ongoing perfectionism, you could potentially become a default parent because again, if we are trying to live up to the expectations of others, or if we're trying to live up to the expectations of society because we want to be that perfect mom, that perfect wife, default parenting might be in your future. And then lastly, if you or your partner grew up in a family that upheld more patriarchal norms regarding parenting, caretaking, household tasks, that also could then lead to mom or woman being a default parent. So um as I was mentioning these, hopefully you were kind of thinking and identifying like, oh, do these match for me? Do these fit for me? Because these definitely can be some precursors for a default parent role. So you all, I hope that this episode today was helpful because I think before we even get into, undoing default parenting, we first really need to ground ourselves in what is default parenting. And so today you ideally learned what is a default parent. Today, you're walking away understanding that default parenting is a societal cultural syndrome. Today, I hope that you also are learning that within your family system, no, it's not your fault that you have become a default parent. However, you have so much power in really moving this system along and making some changes within your family. And I am here to help you, guide you through that process so that at the end of the day, you, my friend, can have more balance in motherhood because that's what I want for you. I want you to have more balance. And so we're going to do it, girl. We're going to get it. All right. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please come back. We have another episode later this week, but just stick with us. So make sure you are subscribed to the podcast on your favorite podcast app or also on YouTube so you can check me out visually. All right, y'all. I will talk to you soon. Hey, mama. Thank you for listening to the Balanced Working Mama podcast. If you love this podcast, please be sure to rate it and share it with another mama that you know. And don't forget to follow me and Balanced Working Mama on Instagram. I'll talk to you soon.